Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here today for our Davis Discoveries Symposium for 2017, the Demba on Display. And I especially want to thank our Friends of Art group for providing the funding for this event, as well as my colleagues at the Davis, Serena, Alicia, and Arthurina, especially have been helping with the logistical details today. So this is a very special event for me because when I was applying for this job, I was asked to prepare a gallery talk on something in the collection. So I've been researching this object since before I had a job here. So it's really exciting for me to, almost exactly a year later, since I found out about the position, to bring together three esteemed scholars to discuss it. So I am Amanda Gelvin, assistant curator here at the Davis, and I am a specialist of African art and have really been focusing on this part of the collection since my arrival last August. So the format today, I'm going to give a brief introduction to why we're doing this event and the history of this object within our collection, and then I'll introduce our three speakers, and then each of them will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for a conversation, which we'll also open up to our audience. So I'm going to reserve a full introduction to the Demba, which is as it is in our collection, a shoulder headdress worn by the Baga peoples in West Africa for a variety of important community events to Dr. Frederick Lamp in a moment. But I really wanted to start with this image to orient us toward why these artworks were made and the scale of the artwork. It's not merely a wooden headdress, but also a raffia dress, a indigo shawl, and women singing, and men playing drums, and an entire community who comes together. Right now, this is the Demba as installed in the Davis that many of you have seen, and if not, I hope you'll head over to check it out later. We installed it at a certain height and with certain prominence in the gallery with very careful strategies in mind, but we've also been very open to other options for how we might display this artwork. And that's part of why we wanted to have a whole conversation about it, to consider what different kinds of strategies we might consider, or we might think about leaving it as it is. So I want to just introduce our collection very briefly. Wellesley began collecting art when it opened in 1875, and its first museum, the Farnsworth, opened in 1889. For many decades, Wellesley did not own any African art. It was in 1953 when director John McAndrew purchased Wellesley's first object of African art, this Bete Orwe composite animal mask. And he was interested in it largely as the kind of object that would have been a referent for European modernism. So you can see it shares certain kinds of formal qualities with this Grebo mask, that's owned by Picasso. That was an inspiration for the guitar. But just a couple of years later, McAndrew's approach to collecting African art changed when a student, then Suzanne Kledgman, matriculated at Wellesley. Within 5 days of her first class, her father, John J. Kledgman, wrote to McAndrew to offer to facilitate gifts from his clients. Kledgman was with his wife, the owner of one of the most prominent galleries of African art in New York at the time. And very shortly thereafter, he did facilitate the first gift from a client, this Benin Kingdom sculpture of an Oba. And this shift was really important as he continued to facilitate gifts from his clients, not just for how it shaped the collection, but it really shifted how McAndrew was teaching African art as well. Very quickly, he organized a show about art, as he called it, outside the great traditions of East and West Africa, America, and Polynesia. So again, this is this quite generalizing approach to geography, but was intended to expand an art historical canon and to ask students and other visitors to the Wellesley collection to study these artworks for their original meanings, in addition to how they might be inspirational elsewhere. I should note as well that Suzanne Kledgman, who we all now fondly know as Susie Bennett, is likely tuning in on Facebook Live. And so I want to acknowledge that you're joining us, and we're excited to hear what you think later. So a couple of years later, the Kledgmans began donating objects themselves. And this is the first donation, another Baga work, from John Jay and Helena Kledgman. And this is interesting for us today and for thinking about the assembly of this collection more broadly, for some of the notes that came in with it. Kledgman wrote that this was an important Baga sculpture. He thought it was the prow of a boat instead of a headdress. And he described it and explained that it was made by the Baga of French Guinea. They number around 4,000 and were recently converted to Islam, so that their elders gave them permission to dispose of their tribal carvings. As I think that we're going to hear, the story is much more complex than that, but it's intriguing to get this very direct account of what a dealer in New York was being told by likely European dealers who were collecting the objects in Guinea before selling them to him. And then in 1959, with a series of other African objects, the Kledgmans donated the Demba, which brings us here today. That same year, the Jewett Art Center opened. So the first time the Wellesley Art Collection was installed in a modernist building, where the Demba was on frequent display. And we have this wonderful archival photo from 1969 of Wellesley students studying it. And of course, there's this irony in the display of Dembas throughout the US, but including here at Wellesley, is that they were illegal in Guinea at this time, but being studied as this example of kind of a broader category of African art. In 1993, we opened in our building designed by Rafael Mineo. At that time, there was a very small permanent gallery of African art that we do not have installation photos for, and people were not very pleased with. There were a few different other art incarnations in that version of the permanent installation. And then when the galleries were installed in 2006, they were divided into different themes. And the Demba again took a prominent place in a theme around the ideal body. For our most recent permanent reinstallation, many of you know that African art has taken a much more prominent role. So we went from having around 5 or 6 African objects out to 85 and 3 dedicated galleries. And the Demba again has a prominent place, but this time in a gallery that is largely dedicated to other objects associated with masquerade and other kinds of performance. We have tried to address the changing social meanings of all of the objects in the African galleries, in part through taking up the Demba as a case study. And so we have this kind of focused didactic wall, thinking through the different stages that various Dembas have gone through, including, of course, ours at Wellesley in the 60s. So today I've invited our colleagues to come to bring different perspectives on the Demba as a medium, and to help us think through, as I said, these options for how we might display it. There are some standard options that they'll introduce to us, and a couple of the more typical ones I thought or like key examples that I thought I'd share with you before we see theirs are such as at the Louvre, where we see a Demba on a shorter platform. So you can see it face to face. And of course, like ours, it does not have its fuller ensemble. And then at the Art Institute of Chicago, we see several different kinds of Baga masks ensemble with their raffia. She's missing a shawl. These have other parts of theirs. The inop and the banda. So to think through like the broader range of ways we might present these. But of course, as I mentioned before, this is even with the raffia dress, we are still missing much of the original artwork. So now I'll introduce our guests all at once, and they'll each take their turns, and we will gather together to chat afterwards. So our first guest is Frederick Lamp, who is the Francis and Benjamin Benenson Foundation Curator Emeritus of African Art of Yale University. He also had a very productive long tenure at the Baltimore Museum of Art, which is where he curated a book many of you are familiar with, Art of the Baga, a drama of cultural invention. And his many years of scholarship on the Baga have not only been important here in the US, but also important for Baga art practitioners in Guinea. So we'll look forward to hearing about that. He has many other publications, both catalogs and other museum publications, such as Accumulating Histories, African Art from the Charles B. Benenson Collection at the Yale University Art Gallery. Next, we'll hear from the Associate Curator for the Arts of Africa at the Metropolitan Museum, Yael Biro, who in her scholarship focuses on the reception of African art in the West during the first decades of the 20th century. And so we're very eager to hear her thoughts on how the Demba has been displayed and exchanged outside of Guinea and displayed in the Met and other museums. She has collaborated on numerous exhibitions, including the Nelson A. Rockefeller Vision in Pursuit of the Best of the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and Americas, and Warriors and Mothers, Epic Mbembe Art. And her exhibition, African Art, New York and the Avant-Garde, received the 2012 Small Exhibition Award of Excellence from the Association of American Museum Curators. And Christopher B. Steiner, in case you need to Google him, is the Lucy C. McDaniel 22 Professor of Art History and Anthropology and the Director of the Museum Studies Program and the Acting Chair of the Art History Department for this semester at Connecticut College. And his award-winning book, African Art in Transit, has inspired many of us, including me, to ask the kinds of questions that we do in the study of African art. He teaches a range of interdisciplinary courses in art history, anthropology, and museum studies, from the arts of Africa to, and you get to find out a lot about this on Facebook as we were discussing, kitsch and bad art emerging from the margins. His field research focuses on the construction of value and meaning in art through transnational exchange. And in addition to African Art and Transit, he's the co-editor of Perspectives on Africa, A Reader in Culture, History, and Representation, and Unpacking Culture, Art and Commodity in Colonial and Post-Colonial Worlds. He's currently working on a publication with the Harvard Peabody Museum that we are all looking forward to reading. So we will get started now. So I'll welcome Fred to get started. So I'll open your...
Thank you, Amanda. I'm not sure which of these is recording me, but if you can hear me okay? Here? Okay. Thank you, Amanda, for that introduction. It's on automatic slide. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here at Wellesley College today, where I have never been, and it's a pleasure to see your museum. which is beautifully done. Okay, I assume I can just push the arrow here, the arrow button to advance?
Yes, that's what you need to.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to, since I've worked with Baga for many years, since 1985, and with her relatives in Sierra Leone, the Temne, since 67. I will talk a little bit about the context of Demba, how she appears in performance, what those performances are about, and show how she should really look to the Baga people, how she looks to the Baga people. And first of all, I have to say that she is never still. So they never see Demba still. They always see her in motion. And this is very important to what she is as an art object as well as a spiritual being. So this is what I've always emphasized. I also wrote a book called See the Music, Hear the Dance. And there I put forth my ideas about how objects of African art should be viewed and how they should be regarded and how they should be taught, always as a part of performance. So I'll just show you a couple of these. This is a performance that was done when I first came in 1980. Well, I came in 1985, and then 1986, 87, I went again. And this is in the town of Katako, the village of Katako, among the Baga Chitem. And they performed, they decided to, since this American scholar was coming to visit them, and as Amanda mentioned, everything was made illegal, starting really with the Islamic jihad. It was not a friendly conversion. It was a forced conversion from 1954 to 1957. And so nothing, no masks existed, no performance of traditional religion. So when I came, this American scholar coming to study Baga religion and culture, which didn't exist in effect, at least not in that way, they got the idea maybe now that the old dictator had died, and that's why I was allowed into the country, maybe they could start up again. And so everywhere I went in the villages, I would come in with my interpreter, and we would explain what I'm here to do. And one by one, each of these meetings with the villagers, everybody would turn out for this American who's here. My God, this hasn't happened in 30 years. And one by one, it would become like an old-fashioned revival meeting. And people, the old elders would get up and they would say, we're going to bring back the dances. We're going to teach the young people, just like evangelicals in Tennessee. So it became something much larger than I had ever thought would ever happen. I thought I'd interview a few old people and that would be it. So in every village, they revived almost all the sacred dances, especially Demba. Not the very most high spirits, but almost all of them. So this is what I saw, and I came back in '92, and now they were starting to develop dance troupes. So this is Demba, and as you can see, a raffia gown from the waist on down. Always a dark shawl, almost always a dark shawl on top, representing a woman, an adult woman who had given birth to children. And so she has these long, flat breasts and always these tacks, or almost always. Some of them don't have them, but most of them had brass tacks in patterns all over. And these are very important because she danced in the middle of the day in the bright sun in the dry season. And so she was just glistening. In addition, she had this very black, shiny surface, and then these bright brass tacks. And I always describe it as sort of like disco lights for those of us who went to the disco in the 80s. Nightclub lights now, as they're flashing in the sun. So this is very important to who she is, because she is an image of brilliance. And that's how they see her. Brilliance in every way that we use that term. Okay, so I wanted to show you some footage. It starts, this is footage that I edited for my exhibition on the Baga. It starts with the Banda mask. I will just show you a minute or so of this, because I'm going to talk about the Banda at the Metropolitan and what they did, which is a good thing. So you can see how it is. It has raffia. It's a very vigorous dance. And then it has this tailored costume behind it. So now I'm going to advance to the Demba. If I can do this without messing it up. Okay, oh no, what happened?
No, I think it's just...
Oh, it's just the break between.
Yeah, good.
I hope.
Yeah, it's still going.
Okay. Okay, the Demba. I used to spell it Sitemu, now I use Chitame. Baga was never written before. Nobody wrote about it, really, except one anthropologist back in the 50s. So I had to sort all these names out for myself. And that's the way the Baga writers themselves, some of the students who wrote about themselves, they call themselves Sitemu, but it's really Chitame. So one of the contexts that it appears in is the marriage ceremony. Marriage ceremony doesn't exist anymore as it did then. But the Baga are really kind of, I don't know whether they're unique in Africa, but they're certainly unusual in Africa in that they had a marriage ceremony that lasted an entire week. And every day the bride danced, and every day Demba danced. And so this was that performance that they decided to do, which took an entire day when I first came. And everybody turned out, and the Catholic priests let everybody out of the school and dismissed the teachers and all the students to come see it, because this was an event. Most of them said they had never seen the Demba dance before. These were the Baga people. So they carved this mask new, and in this case, they reenacted. So I always want to make very clear exactly what we're seeing. They reenacted the marriage ceremony. As it turns out, they continue to do the Demba dance, and so I consider that as authentic as any, as they continue to dance it for themselves. But this was a reenaction of the marriage they wanted me to see. Now, this was not a reenactment. It was a performance in one of the villages. So I have combined several images of Demba from different villages. This again is back in Katako. The marriage, the family is carrying the dowry. The bride was carried off on someone's shoulders, and now the bride comes out. They had to get an older woman because no one knew how to do the bride's dance. So you had to have been at least 50 years old to have been married 30 years ago, or 45 anyway, to do this dance. So this shows you the complete complement of things that would happen during the performance. I think you saw at one point Demba was laid down, I didn't catch it, but laid down on the ground in front of someone, and that was a family where she had just given birth to, a woman had just given birth to a child. She was giving homage. And you'll see people come up to her and slap her breasts. And this is considered to be an affirmation of her femininity. I can tell you a lot of stories about that in real life. Men carrying antelope trumpets, which they would play. You can see again the cloth, dark cloth on top, the raffia on the bottom. So so this is in different villages. This is another one. The first one they danced in the village of Katako, and I thought that I was surprised that they had this because all of these things had been banned, illegal, as Amanda said, by the government in a program they called demystification. So they wanted to demystify the whole country. There she is lying down in front of the family. So anyway, I was surprised that they had one. Within a few weeks after I arrived, they were dancing. And when I went back in 2008 again, I asked them about this. I said, but you had a Demba before I came. And they said, oh, we heard that there was an American researcher coming, and we quick carved one and learned the dance because we had to show him something. So I had always thought, oh, they had started like a year before reviving things. So an example of how the researcher really gets thrown right into the middle of their culture. You can't be a fly on the wall. I wanted to show you some other some other forms of the Demba and things that evolved. In 1958, I talk about demystification. The program actually began in 1960. The government of Guinea, Guinea got its independence in 1958. Immediately, there was a man called Sékou Touré who became president. He became a very difficult dictator over the years, and so bad that 1/3 of the entire country fled the country and became refugees during that time. So I think I can say that he was a pretty harsh dictator. And but in 1958, just before the independence, a lot of people came to Guinea because they knew independence was coming. There was already the political parties, and Guinea was a special case in that they refused to become part of the French community. So there were a lot of dealers from Paris who came down quickly and bought up a lot of these masks. They were following the Muslim missionaries who were confiscating all the masks in the village, and the dealers bought these up. And then there was a particular German dealer who came down. His name is Boris Konietzko from Hamburg. And he got something very curious. And I don't really know. I met him. He gave me these pictures. But here is one that he showed in dance. I'm not going to do the video. There is a video that he took of the object. Here's being prepared for the dance, and here it is in dance, and he did a video, and there are about 15 women standing over on the side singing, and then there are 2 drummers. You saw how many drummers there were in mine. In the past, there could be up to 20 drummers following. So he had 2 drummers, and they're all a little listless, and they go around in a circle, and the women sing, and you can see it's just a staged event. And incidentally, most of the photographs that you see in books of objects that they label in situ, that is, in the place, are staged. They are not genuine ceremonies, authentic ceremonies, indigenous ceremonies. They're almost always staged. And so that's why I think it's very important to say exactly what it is that you're showing. I'll just go through. This is the man, Boris, and his wife. And he must, I don't know whether he had all of this, he just found someone to carve all of these, and the one, even including the ones that one he showed in dance, because that one I think is here. This one happens to be in the Yale University Art Gallery. It's not the one we show, but so it's an interesting phenomenon. He claims it was all authentic, but he obviously had someone quickly make a lot of these masks. Maybe he was already carving that mask that he showed in dance. I don't know. Here is a French dealer, Helen Loulou. She was Hélène Camère at that time. She went with her husband, Henri, and they went and followed the Muslim missionaries as they confiscated objects so they could buy them up. And Muslim missionaries first were burning these or throwing them in the river. And then they discovered they could actually finance their jihad by selling all these to the French. So that's what happened. And yeah, I believe that absolutely every object, there might have been 2 or 3 exceptions of objects that were saved, but as far as I know, everything was confiscated and everything was sold. So I just wanted to show you, there are about 50 masks that are in this style, and I've just called it classical because that's what dealers like to call it. It's one style that's very well known, and it has this big head, prognathic head, very elongated, with this big, huge nose and braided hair, very nicely braided with a crest, and then the long, flat breasts, and always something on the neck here, projection from the neck. Very nice decoration on the face, which looks like scarification, but it probably isn't, since the Baga never did that kind of scarification, as far as I know. And so it's very beautiful form, and there are a number. That one is in where is it? Chicago, I think. I have captions on all my slides, but I can't see them here. So anyway, I'll have to wing it. This is in the Barbier Mueller Museum in Geneva. This was a private collection, Rivière collection in France. So you see, they all have the same kind of face, the huge eyes, the big, huge nose, and so forth, and flat breasts. Incidentally, this is the one at Yale. And incidentally, 5 minutes. I better move along. So that's that kind. And then there are others that are a little bit different. There is a whole series of these. No one knows where they came from. I was never able to get anyone to tell me where these came from. They didn't seem to recognize it, but there are many, about maybe 10 of these in this style, and with the big bulbous breasts at the bottom, and some of them seem to have been worn, but I was never able to get information. This is another style at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. This is a private collection in Zurich, a little different too. This is a collection in Lisbon, Portugal, probably from Guinea-Bissau, among the Nalu. And then there was a fake. This is in the Musée de Dakar in Senegal. And this is very famous because that was the Institut Français at that time, de l'Afrique Noire, so the French Institute of Black Africa. Now it's the Institut Fondamental. So this was really a very important place, and they had this object, and it got spread all over the place. So when the old dictator died, he never would have had a Baga mask on the currency, which was called Sili. But in 1985, or 6 actually, when they made new currency for Guinea, the franc, here it appeared, and lo and behold, it's the one from Dakar. It's a fake, so this is the official Demba of Guinea now. Here it is. If you have an ATM card, that's what you get. Same guy. Coins, same mask from Dakar. And then after demystification, things started happening. Secretary actually encouraged dance troupes. And so they were very interested in Baga dance. So this is, I know this fellow right here, Vincent Bangura, and they made this mask and they danced with it, just like Ballet Africain, which is a very famous dance troupe. They had a Demba, and then when I came, this is the one they had. And I met a carver who was from a long line of carver, who I believe his family actually carved the classical style. His name is Manjou. I found him in the town of Bakour, and he's still carving. He's since died. So that's the end of that tradition. But you can see it's in that sort of classical style. Now, restoring context. This is, you ever seen this picture? This is from Antwerp. It's actually a zoo, and they have reconstructed a Benin, whole Benin scene of Benin bronzes, not actually bronze, but I just thought this is so hilarious. I had to show it. This is exactly the way not to provide context with the monkeys up there. And so this is something I did with at the Baltimore Museum of Art and also at the Museum of African Art in New York. How I showed the serpent figures, and they're usually two in kind of a performance combat. So I dressed this up, and Demba always had a very dark shawl as an elderly woman or as an adult woman, very respected. The serpents always had brilliant. In later pictures from like the 40s or 50s, I see they're wearing lurex with metallic cloth on the top. But she always had a very conservative dress. This is in the Metropolitan Museum. And I showed you the performance of this at the beginning of the Banda mask. And they did a very wise, well done reconstruction with the whole costume, and they contacted me. They got my videos. They studied all the videos, every position that she danced in, and they created this tailored costume. It's a very complicated costume because it's tailored with ruffles and so forth, and they did a wonderful job. So this really shows how it would have been used, and we know what the costume should look like. Here's a picture in a paper I always thought was amusing, in a Guinean paper, where we look at the Demba and that's the Demba, but they look at a Demba and it's naked. It says Nimba. She's also called Nimba. Déshabillé, that is Nimba nude, Nimba without clothes. So this is shocking for them. So it's just the opposite from us. Now, Demba has been published many times, and this is a very early one, I think from the 50s. This one you've seen is from the 30s. I published this. This is a postcard from 1906. You can see how they should be. Here's how they show it in Toulouse, just a raffia costume pulled up around her neck. In the old Musée de l'Homme, raffia costume pulled up around her neck. Same in Chicago, same in Seattle. Why are they doing this? This is in the old Musée de l'Homme again. Here, that one turns out now on the currency of Guinea-Bissau. Same thing, badly dressed, misdressed. This shows you how it should be. How it works. There is a ring around the bottom. This is the Musée Picasso. It was owned by Pablo Picasso. You can see there's a ring where they attached all the raffia, and so the raffia only hung down from the waist, and then there was this cloth around the top. Here is the Chicago Art Institute of Chicago. You showed a better picture. She'd be tripping on her gown for one thing. All of them would be tripping on the raffia. And no cloth around Demba. They just attach some kind of cloth in the back of the banda, not knowing how it looks and how it's supposed to be. I wrote to her and I said, this is all wrong. I like the way that you dress them, but everyone is wrong. Why didn't you consult with someone who knows? Do like the Metropolitan did and look at the videos. So, it's kind of a shame. They had a good idea, but, let's get it right. You don't just dress up all your masks in raffia and great, Okay, she was taking it from this picture, which is in my catalog of the Abaga. This is the one from Toulouse, has this raffia thing on. But, when you get a picture when you publish pictures in a book, you get them from the museums, you have to use the photo they send. You're not allowed to crop them. You're not allowed to alter them. So I never thought about it. But when I write a book again, I will include a caption saying, this is wrong. It should not be this way. So that really misled her. But here you see how they're used. I wanted to go back to that. If you're going to dress it up, see the ear, and in the picture you showed from Katako, they had this ear ornament, which like a clamp. It clamped onto the ear. with pins that went down through holes in the ear. So that's one way, if you're going to dress up the Demba authentically, you might want to consider that. This one is from the Baltimore Museum. It has these tacks that I was talking about. And the curator who came after me loved my book. Okay, that's great. See the music, hear the dance. And I talked about the bright brass tacks. And so she wanted to do an exhibition based on my book, on these ideas of performance, situated in performance and so forth. And so she wrote to me and she said, I think we ought to polish up all the brass tacks because they're corroded. It's an old mask. You can see the wood is aged. And I said, no, don't polish up the brass tacks. It will look funny, bright brass tacks, and then the wood is old and it's incongruous. Talk about it or show new photographs of new masks if you want to show, but she did it anyway. A $7 million mask, and she's, violated in my view. I don't know how the conservatives got away with it. Okay, I'll just run through this. This is another way to show how it's used. They did this in Baltimore. I had nothing to do with it, but they created a soft sculpture. This is how the other mask was shown at Yale, the one I showed you before that came from that big collection that was made with an object of modern art. So that's what they wanted to emphasize. African art is modern art. This is how I showed it, our main mask at Yale, when I redid the installation. So she was surrounded by objects. I decided not to dress her, so making our director happy, not violating the object, but to surround her with 5 photographs of her in the context. And I'll just run through the other way. Extreme intervention. So this is what you can do. Here's Demba. This is a Ghanaian scientist who used Demba on his calling card, looking into a microscope because she is wisdom and knowledge and so forth. So you could do that. Just threw this in a camel caravan of the Tuareg in Mali. What would you do if you wanted to translate this into something modern, in modern life? Well, you would probably have a caravan of Mercedes-Benz trucks, and then they would be on the top with their Kalashnikovs and guarding it, and that would be the modern translation of this scene. I'll just show these. This is a black artist in New York. She's a goddess of beauty. Okay, let's put a model of lingerie with her. This is Picasso. She isn't here a muse, so you could show her as a muse. Modern art. Here is yours. I'm ending up with this. Beautiful object, and I really like the way you've done it. But, this is the Duchess of Kadavul and her daughters. They're all wearing, she is sort of like Demba. She's an honored woman from Portugal. She's wearing Givenchy and dark conservative outfit, and they're all wearing Givenchy. And so let's put Demba in Givenchy as an honored elder woman, very elegant. Or if you like, let's go more historic and put it in the Countess of, this is a Bourbon, one of the Bourbons. So anyway, that's where we'll leave it. Don't do this. I'll kill you.
So, hi everybody, I'm Yael Biro, as Amanda introduced me, but just in case you forgot, I'm the Associate Curator for African Art at the Metropolitan Museum. And Amanda asked me to talk about the history of displaying Demba at the Met. But I couldn't really do this without giving a little bit of a more general introduction of how Demba has been displayed through 3 specific examples. On the contrary to what Fred just presented to us, my presentation is going to be much more about the West than about Africa, but I guess you also extended in that direction. And what I'm going to show is very much a story of appropriation of an African form within a Western discourse. So just keeping that in mind. What I'll be focusing on is this process of artification of African objects in the West at the turn of the 20th century. The term of artification was coined by a sociologist of art, Nathalie Heinisch, about 10 years ago, together with Roberta Shapiro, and described artification as a series of actions that are taken in order to literally transform a work that was not seen as art, in the Western context, in our case, into a work of art. And these series of actions, can include vocabulary changes, ways, photography, modes of display. And so we're going to see this through, again, a series of examples. Here we go. And I will go back to this image in a second. I just thought it was great. So Fred showed us one postcard from, I think it's 1906, which shows Demba in the field with its full outfit surrounded by a number of individuals. Before this, Demba had been reproduced, had been illustrated a number of times in travel accounts from Guinea, in journals like Tour du Monde that were very popular in France at the end of the 19th century. But somehow its fame in the West really came when it started to be reproduced systematically in a number of journals and publications that were created by individuals involved in the modern art field. So this is, I think, one of the very first publication of a Demba in one of these books. This was published by Marius de Zayas in 1916. Marius de Zayas was an art dealer, caricaturist by training, based in New York, who opened a gallery in 1915 called the Modern Gallery. And in 1916, he published this work, which was the one that was at the Trocadero. It entered the collection at the Trocadero in 1902. And as you can see, the title of the book is African Negro Art, Its Influence on Modern Art. So it positions Demba very interestingly right away within the modernist discourse. And to my knowledge, it's really one of the first time that one sub-sculpture is published beside the postcards that Fred mentioned earlier. What's interesting to me in this particular image is the fact that, so not only is de Zayas identifying the collection within which the work is, the Musée d'Ethnographie Palais du Trocadéro in Paris, but then also give Demba as a name and describes it as idol of maternity from French Guinea. And I'll want you to just keep this in mind because these are the terms that we're just going to find again and again in the following publications. You can see that the sculpture has its raffia skirt attached to the shoulder, so not, I guess, in the proper way as we have seen before. And it is in a full frontal, full profile view. Here is the same work published the following year, 1917, in Paris by Paul Guillaume, who is also a dealer who positioned himself as one of the very first art dealers in Paris from about 1912. And he's almost responding to de Zayas' publication by publishing an album of 24 plates of works from the Paris Museum, but also his own collection and a number of other collectors in Paris. Here, same terminology, idole de la maternité, Rivière du Sud, so idol of maternity, Musée du Trocadéro in Paris. But here we have two views, full frontal and the profile, which somehow also responds to the anthropological representation of people in books and anthropological books from that time period in the end of the 19th century. It's actually it's exactly the same photograph that is used in both publications, which I find also interesting. Moving on to the second object. So the first one is the one from the Musée du Trocadéro, which kind of opens up the discourse within the modernist world in Paris and New York. Here we have another work, which was published, we move in time a little bit. This is a publication from 1929, L'Art chez les peuples primitifs, Art Among Primitive People by Adolphe Basler, 1929. And in here, he publishes this work, which was at the time in the Galerie Percier in Paris, which was an art gallery that was also selling works of art. It's described as a fetish, so not an idol anymore. It's a fetish in this case. But you see that this one is wearing the dark cloth on its shoulder. What's interesting is that this particular work is acquired by Picasso just around that time, because the following year, this is the same work. It is included in an exhibition at the Galerie Pigalle in Paris and is described as belonging to Picasso. So I find this photograph absolutely fascinating, and I need to thank Nicolas Roland in Paris for sharing this image with me. This is a photograph by the modernist photographer Germaine Krul. It's from 1930, and it's a photomontage where you see sharply dressed Frenchman, I would imagine, or German, in front of Demba, which has assumed this very towering position. You have the very strong shadow projecting on the wall. She is partly covered by the cloth on her shoulder, still wearing the raffia skirt. And for me, this image really represents that modernist moment in Paris, and the fact that to some extent Demba seems to have represented another form of cultural reinvention that is happening in the West at that moment. In the 1940s, André Breton, the leader of the Surrealist movement, cited Demba in particular as one of the work that led the way, that it was in its wake that the modern eye was revolutionized. And, thinking about this in terms of this change of guard in French art that is happening at that time, I think is quite interesting. So this is the Picasso work, fully dressed, but reinvented by a modern photographer. And then here is the same work again, that same year. So we're still in 1930. This is over there how it is shown at the Galerie Pigalle in Paris. You can see that it has lost its shawl in the process, but the skirt is still there, attached at the bottom of the feet as it was probably previously. And at the same time, there is this article using the postcard that Fred showed us earlier, and then showing the sculpture in the exhibition. And the article itself is really fascinating because it describes how the time when one would find African objects in bazaar is over, and now they have been stripped bare, polished, undressed, and presented as works of art. So this is really a moment, something that is happening at that particular moment through these different exhibitions and series of publications. And here it is again. So that's in the catalogue of the Galerie Pigalle, where it is described as a fetish, once again. It is in the Picasso collection. And here, it's probably still wearing its skirt, but the photograph itself is cutting it off. So it's really been, progressively undressed to the point that there is nothing left. And even the medium of photography is being used to continue transforming it into a work of art in a Western concept. Okay, different example. And I can go through these quickly, but I think they're really quite telling. This is a work, a different work that was sold at auction in 1926. In Paris, it was sold for 30,000 francs, which was a significant amount of money at the time. It is described as a goddess of maternity, and it's also described just as a statue. So until now, we haven't seen any description that suggests that it's a mask in one form or another. It's always a fetish, an idol, a goddess, and just simply a statue. But you see here that it is wearing still its raffia skirt. There is no shawl on her shoulder. And here is the same object, published systematically one year after the other, during the 1920s and 30s. And basically, the work from the Trocadero, the Picasso one, and this one are the three Dembas that are systematically reproduced during that time period. I haven't found any other one, but maybe you might have another opinion. Guillaume and Monroe in the French edition, 1929, Idole de la Maternité, again, same terminology. Ponston and Portier, 1930, and then in African Negro art, just described as idol. Maternité is gone. And here you can see how with the photograph, it's just being framed narrower and narrower on the face, removing, completely stripping it away from its original signification and its original significance. And this is how it ends up being displayed in 1935 in African Negro art, the exhibition at MoMA, where, again, it is just described as idol, French Guinea. No hint to what it might have been used as in its original context, no hint at the fact that it's a mask or anything else. So we've really moved a long way from the postcard that was reproduced in 1908 and then 1935, where it has become a pure work of modern art, almost displayed in the white cube. So this is this exact object, and actually this particular photograph, published in African Negro art, that is used by René Darnoncourt to get inspiration as he is helping Nelson Rockefeller shaping the collection of what was going to become the Museum of Primitive Art. So let me just give a quick context. The Metropolitan Museum owns today the collection of Nelson Rockefeller that he donated in 1969 to the Met, and really allowed the Met to become a truly encyclopedic museum. So it was about 3,000 works of art of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas that were transferred from Nelson Rockefeller's private museum, called the Museum of Primitive Art, to the Met at that time. René Darnoncourt was Rockefeller's original advisor at the very beginning of the inception of that collection. And as he was trying to shape that collection, he created notebooks, one for Africa, one for Oceania, one for the Americas. And these are 2 pages for the one for Africa. And you see that it was always divided in 2 different sections. You have the little D up here and the little C. D was for desiderata, C was for catalog. The D was a page of an ideal object that he wanted to see enter the collection. Not that particular one, but that particular genre. And here, this is the one from the Collection Georges Salle that was exhibited at MoMA in 1935 that is used as his example. And on the catalog page are the work that he ended up acquiring for the collection. We have the Banda mask that Fred showed us earlier with its skirt, and I will get back to this in a minute. And then the Demba that is now in the Met's collection. The Banda mask entered in the collection in 1949, and the Demba entered in 1952. So it's actually quite early compared to the massive moment when a lot of these objects came out in the later part of the 1950s. So here it is. It's been scrubbed down. I'm not going to go back to the different features. It does not have opening holes between the breasts through which the dancer is supposed to be able to see. And its surface has really been scrubbed down and doesn't have the dark, shiny patina that most of them are supposed to have. This is the acquisition card, and here you see that it's finally described as a mask. It was described as a yoke mask when it first came into the collection, and you can see that it was purchased from the Kalbach Gallery in 1952, and then a series of exhibitions into which it was integrated. So I went back to prepare for this talk, I went back to our archives and looked at different ways in which it was displayed throughout the years, and I will just go through them quickly, and because what appeared is that it has always been shown in the exact same way. So it actually gets a bit boring and repetitive when you just look at them this way throughout the year. So this is 1953, just the year after its acquisition. It is an exhibition organized at the Century Association called Primitive Sculpture from the Nelson Rockefeller Collection. It's a year before the Museum of Primitive Art opened, so the museum itself hasn't been constituted, but the collection as a collection is starting to be on display. And you see this very frontal view of Demba. Following year, Brooklyn Museum, it's lent to the exhibition Masterpieces of African Art at the Brooklyn Museum, and it is here placed quite high up on a tall pedestal, also in a fairly white cube setting. And here we go with exhibitions at the MPA. The selected works from the collection, 1957. You see that Demba is always somehow positioned in the sightline. It's always straight at the center. Maybe it's also the photographer who's taking these photos. It's probably always the same person. His first name I forgot, but his name is Hut, H-U-H-T. And always taking these angles where Demba is right at the center on tall pedestals. The height of the pedestal kind of changes from one show to the other, but it's really fairly... Here we see it, Traditional Arts of Africa's New Nation, tall pedestal, surrounded by other Baga works. African sculpture from the museum's collection, here again, tall pedestal in the background. You can see the other works from the collection installed, also without costume. This is our Banda mask, at least it's horizontal, as it should be, which is already good. And then the Spirit Canoe mask that's really positioned very low. The World of Primitive Art, which was not at the MPA itself, but in a building that at the time was used, but was owned by the Whitney Museum, where again, a tall white pedestal with Demba kind of in the sideline. And then in the Nelson Rockefeller Vision, which is a show that we organized in 2013 to look into the history of the collection, we had realized how central a work it was in that collection and positioned it kind of at the entrance of the show on a platform with the same profile, in the manner of Rockefeller. What about the permanent galleries? You can see here, this is an architectural drawing from the 1970s, which we have in our archives, that show you here Demba, not very accurately represented, but still you recognize it very clearly in a case by itself. That's how they had originally envisioned to show it, next to the rest of works from Guinea and Sierra Leone. But in the end, it ends up in this big, and I couldn't find an archival image that shows that case more specifically, so you just see it in the background. You can also see that the African galleries at the Met have not changed very much since then, but Demba is on a tall pedestal in that gallery, in that glass case that we now call the aquarium, and that we are very much looking forward to not have anymore at some point. So this is how it's shown now, surrounded by other Baga works. It still really hasn't changed that much, which was really quite a realization for me going through these different archives, despite the fact that things are much more bundled together, crammed together in that space. And you can see how what the contrast is between the Banda mask, which still has that outfit, which was created for it in 1995 by our conservator, Christine Gentini, working from Fred's photograph and footage, and Demba that is still undressed. So the question is, how do we really want to display these works now? We are in a moment where we're thinking about a full reinstallation of our African galleries, and one thing that we know is that we definitely would want to get it out of a case, out of the aquarium, hopefully in the open air. It will depend on a number of things. The issue for us on having works without plexi is that we have so much passage, foot traffic in the galleries, that it creates a lot of dust and a lot of conservation issues for these works. So we have a lot of things to take in consideration. However, I'm at a moment where, I think museum setting is just not a neutral setting, and it's already an artificial place, and that's just what it is. And I think a place like the Met is carrying a very specific history. It inscribes itself, within the history of the Museum of Primitive Art. And of course, we need to be able to change and adapt also to new scholarship. But at the same time, this is very much a fine arts institution that the origin of which is based on that history of creating a canon for the arts of Africa. So, I think we're really pondering these different ideas and thinking about what is the most relevant for an institution like ours in terms of displaying that type of works. And then why dress Demba and not the other works in the collection? And then, if you enter there, then you end up with a museum that looks more like an anthropological museum, and this is also not what we're doing. So these are all questions that are being raised right now and that we're thinking about very carefully. So here it is. There was a very clear way of looking at Demba that was created during the first 3 decades of the 20th century that continues to be reflected until today, and I think it's an interesting thing to look at. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, thank you, Amanda, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really glad I got to see the Demba before my talk. I had not been here